Hello listener, you're welcome to my Beautifier Community Youth Uganda and Recovery Chapel, Uganda. I am your host, Jamesboy imani, and today I'm going to speak about the topic, raising a godly generation. Basically, when we speak about the word generation, we are basically speaking about the different life stages where we see of development. For example, a child is born as a baby, begins actually as a fetus, goes to a baby, then later becomes a teenager, later becomes like a young youth, then later becomes like a young adult, later a full-grown adult, and later maybe an older adult, and later an elderly adult. So as we see, there are very different life stages, and all these things were planned and intended by God. These are the different stages of development in a normal human life, and for those who are blessed enough to have a longer lifespan, have seen these different, have gone through these different stages in life. So one can become first a child, then later becomes also a parent, then later also becomes a grandparent, and for some very lucky families, we've also seen great grandparents, and so on and so forth. So it is very important, because here we are speaking about raising a generation which is after God's heart. It is very important that as Christians and as believers of God, we influence the next generations below us, that even at the time after we are gone, dead and gone, this message of Jesus Christ and the godliness can still continue all throughout the generations after us. So it is very important and very crucial for us to play our role at whichever stage of life we are at. So now we are speaking mostly in the aspect of being a parental figure, where you have the opportunity to influence someone below you in the ways of God. We shall read something from 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1 to 28. Basically, it's the whole chapter of 1 Samuel chapter 1. In this story, we see a story of a man named Elkanah, who had two wives. One was Hannah and the other one was Peninnah. And we clearly see that Hannah was the most beloved wife to Elkanah, though she was very unfortunate not to have children, and whereas Peninnah had their children. Now, this was a big problem to Hannah, because Peninnah used to use this opportunity to instead taunt her, haunt her, mock her, despise her, and make her basically miserable. So Hannah was really distressed, and she went through a lot of mental and psychological trauma because of this situation, this problem that she was in. So she prayed many a times, and we see even she used to sob, cried daily, and even go days without eating, just because she was really in a bad situation. She was like in a dilemma. We see that whenever Elkanah used to go to the temple to pray and sacrifice, he always used to give the better share of the meat and all these things to Peninnah, because Peninnah had children, but Hannah really had very less demand. She really didn't have much power in determining what she could get a share of the meat, because she really didn't have children. So she had to take whatever portion that was assigned to her whatever that was available is what she had to take. This really made her to feel so inferior compared to Penina. We see a time when she had gone to the temple with Elkanah, and she decided to go into the temple, when they had gone to Shiloh, and she decided to go to the temple to seek the Lord. And there we see she was in so much deep anguish. She was in really distressed, and she called on to the Lord at that time. And we even see, to prove that she was really in a bad state, we even see that the chief priest at the temple, who was called Eli, even thought that she was drunk. He even at first rebuked her and told her to throw the wine out, only to realize later that she was just genuinely praying to God. Of course, he blessed her after, and she promised God that after he granted her her prayer request of giving her a son, she would dedicate this child to serve him for all his life. Now, that story, we really see that children are really important in a family. Children are important, and it's really something that is scary when someone does not have a child in a marriage, because now it's like the legacy gets affected. Generations and legacy are passed on through different generations and through offsprings. So here we see that Hannah was really worried because she didn't have anyone who would continue Elkanah's legacy through her. So it was very important. And we see here it's very important that we all have different generations after us, or else that means we run out to become extinct. If the bloodline is not continued, that means that family line reaches an end and it ceases to exist, which is something very unfortunate. Now, in Psalms chapter 127 verse 3, we see that children are a gift from the Lord. They are a reward from Him. Psalms 127 verse 3 says, children are a gift from the Lord, and they are a reward from Him. So we who have had the opportunity and the blessing of having children, we have a great responsibility of taking care of them and raising them according to how God requires. Because if God is the one who has given them to us, then of course He expects us to raise them in His way. But it's very unfortunate in our days and times. We have seen so many parents who have chosen to neglect their parental duties and responsibilities in so many ways. You see, children are no longer fully, some families, children are not even supervised. There's less supervision, there's less time, there's less communication. So all these things lead to children getting exposed to so many other things which are negative, which they would have avoided in the first place if the parents made time and if the parents were intentional in raising their children the right way. So one thing when we speak about raising a godly generation, it's more about mentorship, taking the responsibility of mentoring the next generation. And of course, when it comes to mentorship, it does not mean that the only people you need to mentor have to be your biological children. It can actually be any young person or anybody below you who needs a sense of direction, who needs to be directed, who needs wise counsel, who needs even at times open rebuke and correction. Anybody who falls in that category and one or another finds themselves below your control, that is a God-given mandate. You have the God-given mandate to actually direct these people below your authority. So in a way, one or another, you are a parent to them. because a parent does not have to really be a biological parent. You could be a guardian, it could be an uncle, it could be even an elder in community, it could be a grandparent. As long as you fall in the bracket of being a parent, and you have a lot that you could use to influence and raise the next generation in a godly way. Now, one thing we see in the Bible is that how we raise our children can be a blessing or a curse. Now, I'll take us back to the story of Hannah and Elkanah. In this story, we see that Hannah and Elkanah later got a child. God answered Hannah's prayer and granted her a son whom she named Samuel. Samuel, which means I asked the Lord for him. And true to her promise, later after Samuel was weaned off, she took him to the temple and dedicated him to the Lord to serve God for the rest of his life. In fact, later Samuel became one of the most powerful prophets at that time. So we see that they used to visit Samuel once in a while. But I highly believe that during this period, they also used to come, mentor him, speak to him, and instill in him good morals and moral values. On the other hand, we see that Eli's children, Hophni and Phinehas, were highly indisciplined, and God was really angry at them. And the funny thing is that these ones were actually priests in the temple at Shiloh, but they really abused their authority, they really misused their powers, because one or another we see that they treated the God's temple with contempt. They used to even take sacrifices that were meant for God disrespectfully from the people who came. They used to disrespect the people who come, blackmail them and all that. We even see that at times they used to seduce the young women who used to come to pray at the temple. And all these things, Eli was aware, because information used to reach him. But one thing that God was annoyed with Eli for was that Eli was not strict and he was not a good disciplinarian, so he really took things lightly. And the more he did this, the more his children went totally off, and later they had to face God's wrath. We see this later because God, even through Samuel and through another prophet, declares doom on Eli's children, promises he will kill them on one day. But not only that, he almost curses the whole family line of Eli, starting from Eli, just because of Eli's negligence of his parental responsibilities. Later we see that in fact even Israel had to suffer because of all this, because when there was a war between Israel and the Philistines, the Israelites were highly destroyed. Over 30,000 men were killed, and even the ark of God was captured and taken away by the Philistines, just because of all these things. And during this war, actually, Hophni and Phinehas were also killed, and the ark was taken. Of course, a messenger came to Eli to deliver the news and tell him, you know what, your two sons have been killed. And Eli was shocked. And on also hearing that the ark of God had been taken, he was an old blind man and was seated on a chair. He got a shock of his life and fell backwards and landed on his neck and broke it and died instantly. Later, we also see that Phinehas had a wife who was expectant, and during childbirth, she also died. A very sad death, because she was really distressed and unhappy when she heard that her husband is dead and her father-in-law is dead. Imagine on one day, you can imagine. Even the name she gave the child was really a name of a sadness, because she said God's glory is taken away. You know, that's the name of the child, what it meant. So you can see how many generations were affected because of Eli's carelessness. Eli died, Eli's sons died, and even the wife died, and even the child inherited another sin. And another thing, we see that blessings, we see in the Bible that blessings and curses all move 3 to 4 generations down the road. So the seed you plant actually has the output. So what you sow is what you reap. If you sow great things, you reap blessings. If you sow bad things, you reap curses, just as Eli did. So here we see a good allegory, a good comparison between good generational raising and bad generational raising, because Eli's children had a terrible, sad demise, whereas we see that Samuel continued to be exalted and lifted to higher places because he found favor with God, because of his good moral standing. Now, one thing we should all know is that God will judge everybody. He will judge all of us according to the purpose that he assigned to each and every one of us. One of such assignments is parenting. There are so many assignments that God gives different individuals, but for those who have been given the blessing of having children, or taking care of people who are below them, then parenting also becomes one of the purposes that they will be judged on. Now, to be a Christian, or the word Christian, means a follower of Christ. That means we have to emulate everything that Christ did personally in the Bible and all these things, and also we have the mandate of raising the next generation in the ways of God. Now, the question would be, how can we raise the next generation in Christ? The first and foremost important thing is dedicating the children to God even before they are born, and even when they become babies. Because here we can see the great story of Hannah, who dedicated Samuel even before he existed, and she prophesied and declared his life. You know, everything that you speak, which is in the will of God, everything that you will, and it's in the will of God, God makes sure it is fulfilled. We see very well whatever Hannah said, and God looked at the purity of her heart and the motives of her heart and mind, and he granted her that. And later, of course, after Samuel was born, she fulfilled the whole promise. Samuel became exactly what Hannah prophesied even before he existed. So it's very, very important, very, very crucial to pray and even dedicate your unborn children, and even when they are born, still you continue praying over them. And that is one way which makes sure that God fights along you to make sure that these children don't go off track. Now, all these things that we should do are to point the children or the young people to Christ. There are many ways we can do this: through praying, through Bible reading, making time through communication, and all the other ways that center around God. This helps the children to be equipped and to know more about God, and this helps them later in life. So basically, we see that raising the next generation involves mentorship. So this involves helping these young people with different life skills. Some of these things that we've learned through life, by experience. Some of these things we've learned through what we've studied and exposure. All these things help, because now you're passing on that knowledge that you have, that wisdom, to a younger generation, so they do not even really have enough time, or they do not have the time to go through the bad things themselves, you know. So it's like one or another, you make their life easier, because you are giving them the reality. You're giving them the reality, and they have the option now of not doing it, or learning some of these bad experiences by going through them themselves. Of course, the one greatest thing to help someone be a powerful person in their generation is helping them to find their identity. Most times we see very many young people have gone off track, or they've lost focus in life just because they try to seek approval and identity through the wrong medium, and even through the wrong company. But the one thing is, to raise a powerful generation for Jesus Christ They need to know their identity in Jesus Christ. They need to know their value. They need to know their worth. They need to know that they are important, that they are created in the image of God. They need to know what God requires of them to do. They need to know what is right and what is wrong, so that the world does not define them and they do not do things to please the world, So it is easier if they know their identity. Also teaching them about purpose. Of course, purpose is not purpose unless it's from God. Teaching them how to use their gifts and talents to edify others and bring glory to God, and also find satisfaction in this life, because there's an emptiness that is taken away if you find your gifts and talents, And of course, getting them involved in constructive teams, groups, and social clubs that can help them improve their social skills, gain them greater exposure and to better things and networks and connections. Remember, the key point here is positive Christian social exposure. And then, of course, open discussions or dialogue or communication is very important, especially the intergenerational dialogue, where people get to communicate, find the center ground, and to understand each other. This way, it helps that each stage tries to understand the other and the middle ground is found. The best way to also raise the next generation is not only by speaking or trying to force things on these young people, but by the way you live your life. So it can be both politically, it can even be politically, socially, economically, whichever sphere in life. If you're a person who has influence and you're a person who is respectable in whatever you do, then that's an opportunity for you to influence the next generation, even if you don't speak to them directly. Just by the way you live your life is the way you speak. In fact, the greatest way to influence lives is greatly, to a higher percentage, non-verbal. So how we decide to live our lives, and if we live lives of integrity, honesty, truth, and positivity, one or another, we are influencing many people who look up to us to doing the same. So it's very important how we live our lives. It's very important that we remember that we are moving signposts, and whatever we do actually highly impact the people who watch us, most especially those people below us who are our children and the younger people in community. Now, Psalms chapter 145 verse 13 says, "For your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. You rule throughout all generations." So we see God's kingdom exists by moving down through different generations. So if we do not allow God to move through our generations, we kill the godly presence in our generations. And I know as godly believers, we need God. So we really need to make sure that God continues in our lifeline, in our bloodlines, by impacting and influencing the generations below us to follow his ways. Psalms chapter 145 verse 4 says, "Let each generation tell its children of your mighty acts. Let them proclaim your power." So this is very important, and it's self-explanatory. Let each generation tell its children of your mighty acts. Let them proclaim your power. So it is our responsibility. It is your responsibility, dear listener. Go out and begin being a great influence. Tell the next generation about the power of God, and make sure that you do your part, your responsibility in raising the next generation, and God will bless you when the time comes for judgment. You'll have at least an account. You'll have something to tell him, So basically, I hope this has been helpful. Let us continue to be positive. Let us continue to be exemplary, and let us have positive influence on the generations to come after us. May God bless you. Till next time.